So evolution could, if it wanted to, construct
Yes,
an organism that's able to perceive
most certainly.
the flow of blood through your body.
Yep.
The way you see an old friend and say, "Yo, what's up? How's the wife and the kids?" In that same way, you would you would feel like a connection to the liver.
Yeah, yeah. I think,
Maybe other people's liver? No, just your own, because you
well,
don't have access to other people's liver.
not yet, but you could imagine some really interesting connection, right? But
Like
some
sexual
bioengineering.
selection. Like, oh, that girl's got a nice liver.
Well, that's
Like
what.
the way her blood flows, the dynamics of the blood is very interesting. It's novel. I've never seen one of those.
But that's exactly what we're trying to half-ass when we judgment of beauty by facial symmetry and so on. That's a half-assed assessment of exactly that.
Yeah.
Of exactly that. Because if your cells could not cooperate enough to keep your organism symmetrical, you can make some inferences about what else is wrong, right? Like that's a very basic.
Interesting. Yeah. So that in some deep sense, actually, that is what we're doing. We're trying to infer how health, we use the word healthy, but basically how functional is this biological system I'm looking at, so I can hook up with that one and make offspring.
Yeah. Well, what kind of hardware might their genomics give me that might be useful in the future?
I wonder why evolution didn't give us higher resolution signal. Like, why the whole peacock thing with the feathers? It doesn't seem. It's a very low bandwidth signal for sexual selection.
I'm gonna, and I'm not an expert on this stuff, but
on peacocks.
Well, but I'll take a stab at the reason. I think that it's because it's an arms race. You see, you don't want everybody to know everything about you. So I think that as much as, and in fact, there's another interesting part of this arms race, which is, if you think about this, the most adaptive, evolvable system is one that has the most level of top-down control, right? If it's really easy to say to a bunch of cells, make another finger, versus, okay, here's 10,000 gene expression changes that you need to do to change a finger, right? The system with good top-down control that has memory, and we need to get back to that, by the way. That's a question I neglected to answer about where the memory is and so on. A system that uses all of that is really highly evolvable, and that's fantastic. But guess what? It's also highly subject to hijacking by parasites, by cheaters of various kinds, by conspecifics. Like we found that and then that goes back to the story of the pattern memory. In these planaria, there's a bacterium that lives on these planaria. That bacterium has an input into how many heads the worm is going to have, because it hijacks that control system, and it's able to make a chemical that basically interfaces with the system that calculates how many heads you're supposed to have, and they can make them have two heads. And so you can imagine that if you are so you want to be understandable for your own parts to understand each other, but you don't want to be too understandable because you'll be too easily controllable. And so I think that my guess is that opposing pressure keeps this from being a super high bandwidth kind of thing where we could just look at somebody and know everything about them.
So it's a kind of biological game of Texas Hold'em.
Yeah.
You're showing some cards and you're hiding other cards, and that's part of it, and there's bluffing and all that. And then there's probably whole species that would do way too much bluffing. That's probably where peacocks fall. There's a book that I don't remember if I read or if I read summaries of the book, but it's about evolution of beauty in birds. Where's that from? Is that a book, or does Richard Dawkins talk about it? But basically, there's some species start to like over-select for beauty. Not over-select, they just some reason select for beauty. There is a case to be made. Actually, now I'm starting to remember. I think Darwin himself made a case that you can select based on beauty alone. So that beauty, there's a point where beauty doesn't represent some underlying biological truth. You start to select for beauty itself. And I think the deep question is, is there some evolutionary value to beauty? But it's an interesting kind of thought that this can we deviate completely from the deep biological truth to actually appreciate some kind of the summarization in itself.